truth, no facades. On my grind every day, stay. I'm the truth, no facades. On my grind every day, stay. I'm the truth, no facades. On my grind every day, stay. I'm the truth, I'm the truth, I'm the truth. I flex when I step, self-made, that's a bet. In my zone, feeling blessed, not a clone, I'm unique. Counting wins, not the stress, with success on my crest. Heavy crown, but I'm strong, never bound to defeat. Riding clean, watch me gleam, elevate to extreme. 808s, hit the beat, my reflection's what I meet. Rocking jewels, breaking rules, my own path, power leads. I'm the one taking flight, hottest peak in my sight. I'm the truth, no facades, on my grind.
Psvane sent me a matched quad of Summit Series KT88 tubes. Psvane's top line meant to offer a modern, reliable take on the classic KT88 power tube. Now, I don't personally own any KT88 amplifiers, so I tracked down an audio gear retailer that had several stereo amps costing many thousands of dollars that would be able to take these tubes. The hi-fi store I went to let me borrow some demo units for testing in the shop, and most importantly, let me come in numerous times to listen over several hours. They were also kind enough to let the tubes burn in for 50 hours before I went back and started listening. Because the sessions took place during business hours with customers around, I wasn't allowed to film, so this review is based strictly on controlled listening sessions and notes, not footage. Also, I want to just point out right now that there weren't multiple of these specific stereo amplifiers available, so I wasn't able to do an A/B test of any kind. So all of this stuff is just based upon my subjective impressions, which I urge you to take with a heaping dose of salt. All three amplifiers used exactly 4 power tubes, making them a perfect match for this quad. I use the Prima Luna Evo 300 integrated, normally which ships with EL34s, but safely supports KT88s via its auto bias circuit. I also use the Rogue Audio Cronus Magnum 3, which runs KT120s or KT88s depending on the configuration you actually end up buying. And finally, I had a chance to listen to the KN-A88T Mark II, built specifically for KT88 or 6550 tubes with selectable ultralinear and triode modes. Each is a full-size speaker amp, not a headphone amp, rated around 40 to 100 watts per channel. We were able to hook up some KEF R7s, some Klipsch Heresy 4s, and a pair of Waferdale Linton 85th anniversary speakers. And we kind of jerry-rigged them together and one after the other, and obviously switched them when we could and when it was feasible, given the limited space that we had to work with. Because we only had one matched set of speakers and amplifier, each comparison was sequential, not simultaneous. Volume levels were SPL matched to within about a decibel to half a decibel using pink noise and a handheld meter, which again, when you're in an audio store with people around, is not particularly accurate. Even then, small shifts in listening position or moving your head a few inches can alter perceived balance more than a tube swap could, given a specific test scenario. So, everything I say here should be viewed as observations, not proof of causation of any sort, except, of course, what I always say in every review. Just because it tends to sound different to you doesn't mean that there are actually real differences, and you have to do proper A/B tests, which I couldn't do here. Let's talk a little bit about the build quality of these specific Summit tubes. Physically, these tubes are solid. Thick glass, consistent internal alignment, clean welds, and identical labeling. Each tube's idle current was matched at 60 milliamps, suggesting consistent emission and vacuum quality. Packaging was also thought out and included individual test data encouraging signs of proper QC. And this is the sort of stuff you don't get when you buy tubes online. For example, there are a bunch of tube retailers, such as Tube Depot, which do have a lot of variety of tubes that you can buy for relatively affordable prices. And they don't come with these sorts of included testing data. It's nice to see that Psvane's tubes, at least the Summit series, do include this information, because it'll help you understand how this stuff will fit in your particular gear, if you're the type to really look at the nitty-gritty. Now, Let's talk a little bit about the perceived sonic differences, if any. Using the stock tubes on the Prima Luna Evo 300, Nora Jones' Come Away With Me placed vocals slightly forward and bass guitar a bit loose around, I would say, 80 hertz. After swapping the Psvane KT88s and letting the amp settle, the bass line sat lower in level but was more, I would say, distinct from the kick drum. Piano transients in the left channel were easier to follow at the same volume setting. The electric guitar in Hotel California, the 1994 live version, might I add, showed less overlap between the rhythm and lead parts, so not clearer in a, mystical sense, just less masking in the 300 to 600 hertz range. A measurable difference or interaction of plate resistance and feedback. At least that's what these store guys told me. I don't know what they're talking about. Look, I don't know. It's hard to say, but I think it is repeatable, meaning that you could probably hear the little nuances that I was hearing. And also, the people in the store helping me out seemed to also hear. Now, about the Rogue Audio Cronus Magnum 3. With the KT120s and the KT88s, again, the Magnum 3 can be configured either way out of the factory. The Rogue has near effortless loudness, so it gets pretty loud. Replacing them, these particular standard tubes, with the KT88s from Psvane reduced available gain slightly, at least that's what I heard. And frankly, when we used the SPL meter, it seemed to be around 1 decibel lower at the same volume knob position. Is that proof positive? No, but it is some sort of indication that something happened. At matched loudness, the stereo image on Bill Evans' Waltz for Debbie stayed identical in width, but upright bass lines were easier to track during bassy or busy passages. Ride cymbal decay in Take 5 by the Dave Brubeck Band appeared a bit shorter, possibly less energy above the 10 kHz or simply just a level difference in mismatch. The important takeaway here is that no new coloration or noise was perceived, just slightly different gain structure and low-frequency damping, which matches known electrical specs between KT88 and KT120 tubes. And obviously, this could also be in part because of two different manufacturers using two different types of manufacturing for a KT88 tube. And finally, how about the KN-A88T Mark II, which came stock with the KT88 of its own? Now, this was the cleanest one-to-one comparison. Switching from the stock Shangwan KT88s to the Psvanes, the background hiss dropped by roughly a couple of decibels, at least what I could hear, and it was also checked on a decibel meter 1 meter from the speakers. On Daft Punk Fragments of Time, hi-hat placement and stereo effects stayed consistent, but the mix floor felt a little bit quieter, suggesting lower tube noise rather than tonal change. Now, remember originally I said that the KN has the ability to be in triad mode, so we did it in that too. So in triad mode, acoustic guitar microdynamics on James Taylor Fire and Rain were easier to kind of distinguish between finger plucks. That's likely due to better channel matching, not any magic warmth or anything like that. So no extra brightness and no soft glow and the airiness or anything like that. It's just stable output from the Psvanes compared to the original Chinese version tubes that were included in the KN. So what are the overall findings? Look, I listened to a lot of tracks, not just the ones that I mentioned, but these are the ones that kind of stood out to me. Across all three amps, my findings are that there's no new tonal coloration beyond what circuit topology probably would create anyway. There's slightly lower self-noise compared with factory tubes, especially with the KN. And that's not necessarily just to the KN. I've had Chinese tube amps, like OTL tube amps for headphones, that came with Chinese tubes that were pretty noisy. And when I replaced them with better quality tubes, that noise floor dramatically fell. And that also allowed me to hear a little bit better music, more musicality, better instrument separation, more vocals, etc., etc. But in this particular instance, the KN was the one that had the higher overall noise from the tubes compared to the other two amps that I used. Also, minor gain differences were present depending on circuit bias design, so there were times that we just had a difficult opportunity or difficult time matching volume precisely. And once again, we're in a store with people walking around, so the decibel meter was only marginally helpful. And finally, there was consistent bias stability over multiple hours of operation. So it's not as if that the tubes kind of fluctuated over an hour or 45 minutes as music played. They were pretty consistent. Every measurable difference was small but repeatable, and once again, measurable by a decibel meter, not by anything else. The audible effects, well, I think there was less background hiss, maybe a little bit tighter bass definition, depending on which tubes and which amp we were listening to, and also, obviously, which speaker. Now, all this aligns with what improved matching and emission consistency would produce, and not just with some romantic audiophile narratives. In my opinion, when you get good quality tubes, you're getting good components that are properly matched. And when you get good components that are properly matched and put them in a very well-designed amp, you're just going to get much better output than you would with, I don't know, really bad tubes in a mediocre amp. So why would you end up choosing Psvane Summit tubes? Old stock GEC KT88s are revered but scarce, unpredictable because they're old, and often running near end of life, again, because they're old. The Psvane Summit series provides modern consistency, tested matching, and accessible pricing. You're buying controlled manufacturing, not nostalgia. And that's really the fine point I want to emphasize. When you buy new tubes, you're really paying for modern manufacturing, more consistency, and better matching. That is what's going to get you across that finish line when you're trying to build your own tube amp or trying to modify the tube amp that you bought for, say, $1,000 or $3,000 or $20,000, depending on how much money you've got. Tube amps and tubes in general won't transform an amplifier's tone. They'll just help it operate within spec and stay balanced across channels, which is really the goal here. You want the tubes to work in harmony with your gear. I wish these KT88s were meant for headphone amps, but they're not. If you want to hear them in a headphone context, I think there's an Elect TU8200R is one of a few kits that supports them safely for both headphones and small speakers. Otherwise, stick to integrated amps like the ones I tested for speakers. After several sessions with the Prima Luna Evo, the Rogue Cronus, and the Can, my takeaway is pretty simple. The Psvane Summit Series KT88s behave predictably, bias evenly, and run quietly. They didn't make any amp sound more musical or lush. They just made each one slightly quieter, slightly tighter, and technically stable. Exactly what you would want from a modern production tube. And by the way, we really didn't know how old the tubes were in the stereo amps that we used. They could have been a year old, they could have been 2 years old, they could have had 50 hours on them, they could have had 250 hours on them. I don't know. It's really hard to keep track of that stuff when they're just demo units and they're on the floor model and people aren't really keeping track of how many hours are on the amp and on the tubes. And sometimes they actually do pull one tube out of one amp to put it in another just because they needed to do that. Having said all that, if you want dependable KT88s that perform to spec without chasing audiophile folklore, I think these will do the job. They're clean, and you'll get repeatable results without any drama. I really like the Psvane Summit Series tubes, if you have gear that can use them.